Thanks for joining the CC America podcast, where we are getting mentally fit through testimonies of faith, inspiration, and transformation. We hope you enjoy the show. This is a live recording of the CC America podcast. Hello, welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this very timely topic. So we will be getting started momentarily. On with us tonight is Ivey. I'm so excited to have my sister and best friend on with us. We are really excited to talk about tonight's discussion and just talking through how we can make a difference in our communities. So we are also live on podbean.com. So please feel free to share this podcast tonight with your friends. It is available at ccamerica.podbean.com. And as you can see, we are live via Just Ivey in the CC America LLC page. So welcome to the CC America podcast, where our goal is to inspire the lives of others through service, dedication, and faith. And this is just one platform in which we are able to do this. So thank you all so much for joining. I see quite a few of you on here, and I absolutely love it. Welcome. We are so excited. And I start every show off with prayer. So I would like to do that tonight, and then we will jump right in. So, Lord God, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for watching over us and taking care of our families, Lord God. We thank you for this opportunity to just talk about things that are going on, Lord God, and hopefully uplift those around us who may be feeling down or discouraged. We come against anything that may hinder your people. I lift up everyone under the sound of my voice, their family and friends, that you would protect each and every one of them, protect the individuals listening, protect their family and friends from things seen and unseen, watch over them and keep them safe through this pandemic and also through all of the civil unrest that is occurring at this moment in time. We pray, Lord God, for guidance and understanding as it relates to race relations all over the world and also in the United States as we are dealing with things very close to home. So we just pray that you would just open up hearts and minds and allow us to be able to hear from you and also to be able to learn from one another. We thank you for this day and every day. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Amen. All right. So again, very excited to have Amber on the CC America podcast tonight. And actually, before we get started, I would love Amber to just give everyone a little bit of background on herself and just a high-level overview of what she is currently doing in the community as it relates to politics and just really making a difference.
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday evening. I know some of you probably were over listening to Kirk Franklin and Fred Hammond. They just had their verses. I missed it, but I caught like the last few minutes of that. So thank you all for taking time out of your day. I think this is a very important topic. So I'm glad, Mary, thank you for inviting me on CC America's podcast to talk about this. Really quickly, I'm Amber Ivey. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am a person who has worked mostly in government performance for most of my career. When I was in the private sector, I did operations, so it was all like performance type stuff and improving how businesses or government works. And right now, I'm currently running for office in Maryland, seeking the congressional seat for Maryland's 7th congressional district. And I'm excited about that. Very interesting times with COVID, very interesting times with what we're seeing. Even here in Baltimore, there's a lot of different protests of what we're seeing here and across the world, actually. So I'm super excited to talk to you all and to really talk about the whole idea of If All Lives Matter.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. And everyone, you're definitely in for a treat. Baltimore, I can say, is very lucky to have Amber running in this upcoming election. So I am very excited to hear what she has to say tonight, especially regarding this particular topic. So the reason that I wanted to talk about All Lives Matter specifically is because right now with the situations that are going on in the United States, specifically the recent death of Mr. George Floyd, God rest his soul and may his family, I'm hoping that they will be able to find some type of comfort and peace during this time, because there's a lot going on, and I can only imagine how hard it must be to be in that particular situation. And so this situation has probably impacted each and every one of you in different ways. And so for me, I actually, it impacted me quite a bit, and I wasn't able to sleep. And then I woke up and I said, you know what, really, if Black Lives Mattered, or if all lives matter, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And so the title of tonight's topic is If All Lives Matter. And so the reason for that is because clearly there are some discrepancies with regard to all lives actually mattering. And so I feel like this is a timely topic, and being able to identify areas of opportunity and things that we can do both civically, through politics, through our jobs, is pretty much the main goal of tonight. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about, just to get us started, is the topic of implicit bias and racial disparities. So in the United States, that one is a hot topic, probably pretty charged, but also relevant, for this time. So one of the things that has come out as a result of the global pandemic is the disparities in our health system. And so the American Bar.
Explain what implicit bias is.
Yes. So implicit bias, and actually let me make sure that I get the formal definition. But essentially, implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And there's actually an implicit bias test that individuals can take online. But essentially, it's all of those stereotypes that dictate how we act and or react in various situations. And so right now, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is an increase in implicit bias as it relates to healthcare. And this is something that's not new. But when we think about implicit bias, it impacts our legal system. So what we're seeing right now with Mr. George Floyd's case, as well as other countless individuals in the African American community that have either been targeted, profiled, or killed by the police. But essentially, it looks at how those stereotypes impact how individuals may do their job, and if they're able to do it effectively. So when we think.
The other part about that, sorry, I want to jump in real quick. The other part about that I want people who are participating in this to understand, we all have implicit bias.
Yes.
Implicit bias is not something you have because you're only one race. Everyone on this earth has implicit biases, whether it's how you were raised, stereotypes you see on TV that make you feel a certain type of way about people, not even just race, just in general, how you see women, how you see kids, how you see all these different types of people. Everyone has implicit bias, and I think we have to set that stage to know that this bias in itself is something we all have. The problem with bias, because it is something we all have, the problem with bias is you have to identify what your biases are and make sure that your biases aren't encroaching on someone else's freedom or stopping them from doing what they need to do. So we're going to have biases, but then we have to look at how do we break those things down so that we're not harming others. Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Oh, and that's a great point. Thank you for saying that, Amber. And Amber is spot on that we do have implicit bias. And one thing, Amber, that you made me think about when you said that is some people hold stereotypes very closely. So there's some people who, no matter what they see, whether it's evidence or they read things or they come in contact with someone, they will still not change that bias. And to Amber's point, all of us have some degree of implicit bias. It's really being able to recognize it. It's kind of like if you have an addiction, if you don't admit you have it, then you can't fix it.
Right.
So I'm thankful for you for bringing that up, or thankful to you for bringing that up. And then some people are able to actually change how they see things once they're educated. So the hope is realizing, one, that we do all have implicit bias, and then how does it impact our decisions? So really great point. And one of the things that Amber and I, we were talking about with regard to just health disparities. So according to the American Bar Association, there have been some studies that have been completed. And in fact, one study of over 400 hospitals in the US alone showed that Black patients with heart disease received older, cheaper, and more conservative treatments than their white counterparts. And they were less likely to receive coronary bypass operations and angiography. After surgery, they are discharged earlier from the hospital than white patients at a stage when discharge is inappropriate. So this is one example, but there are many examples of how implicit bias can impact how we go about things in our day-to-day operations. And another one you all may have heard about more recently
are the yeah. The part about that one, I think folks, when you're listening to that, we should understand how that happens or why that happens. When you're biased, right, against a person, let's not even take out race for 1 second. When you're biased against a person, you may see things or create things that are not there. For example, a lot of times we see especially in healthcare, it's viewed that, and studies have been done, bringing you all data, it's not emotionally charged, is what the data says. Studies have been done that show that doctors believe Black people are stronger and have a higher pain tolerance than they actually do. So a lot of times, because they believe that, because of bias and other things that they've allowed themselves to take in and to put that on their patient, they often do not give the type of care they need to give that person because they may think that person is faking or that the pain is not as high as they're making it seem, and they often ignore the different symptoms and things like that happen with patients. I know for me, I have a healthcare issue or autoimmune condition, and I know when I was trying to figure out what was happening in my body, I kept going to doctors, even Black doctors. It wasn't just white doctors; it was doctors in general. I kept going to them and saying, "Hey, something's wrong. I have these symptoms," and they were like, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about." And I had to literally fight for myself to make sure they knew that, no, something's wrong. I know my body. I was living in it at that time for 30-something years. And I know when something's wrong. And I had to force them to give me what I needed. And even to the point where I was like, I need an MRI. I need you all to give me an MRI because something's wrong and I need help. And they were like, well, your insurance may not pay for it. Like, that should never be the option. And I said, you know what? I'll pay for it. Like, it is my life and what I need to, and I need to determine what's happening. But I had to do that for almost a year trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I had a cousin recently who was in the hospital for a really bad fall where he was knocked out unconscious. And I think he was in the hospital. We went down to see him earlier this year in the emergency room or in ICU. They let him out like the next day. How are you knocked out unconscious, needing stitches on your head, and they let you out the next day? That is a problem. And sorry to cut you off with that one, but yeah, implicit bias in healthcare is one reason. If all lives matter, people of certain colors, certain poverty levels, certain incomes would not have a different outcome.
And with regard to that, Amber, a question that I was actually going to ask you about that specifically is with regard to implicit bias. When you think about your experience from a legal standpoint as well as on the political side, what advice would you give to our listeners on how they can combat implicit bias? So we heard through your situation how you were able to kind of be an advocate for yourself. What other advice would you give our listeners?
One of the biggest things as it relates to, if we're talking about bias in healthcare, you need to be educated. And I grew up in a household where I have a mom who is a nurse. And my mom is specifically a nurse that has worked with mothers who often have problems with their pregnancies. So she's told me all the horror stories of women literally in pain, hemorrhaging, and doctors not listening to them. She's been in that field for over 20-something years and has seen some horrible things and has seen it lean towards one race over another. And because she's seen that, she's always taught me to be an advocate for myself. Like, she's like, when you go in there, if you're in pain, they give you that scale for a reason. One thing we need to realize in healthcare, they're there for pain management. We shouldn't call it healthcare. We should call it pain management. So that's what they ask you. What is your pain scale? And they take all these different notes when you're getting triage to see what level or what order you're going to be seen in, especially if you're going to like an ER for something. And if you are in pain, a lot of times people will, women in particular, also people who are of different ethnic minorities, tend to downplay their pain levels. You need to make sure you're being very honest about how you're feeling. So when it crap hits the fan, you have the records of what's happening. And you need to also make sure you have information and know how to talk about what's happening in your body, and then know how to ask for a hospital administrator. I've had to ask for a hospital administrator before because a procedure went wrong, because someone was not paying attention, was not listening to me. So then I went up above their head and called an administrator. I think a lot of times we let things happen to us and we just let it happen. So whatever avenue you're in, if you're seeing something, not every situation needs to be elevated, right? We don't call escalation on everything. But if it's something that you know was done harmfully, and that if that harm continues to someone else, it could cause a problem for someone else, that's when we need to speak up. And I think we all have to get better about speaking up when we see something happening to ourselves and to others, specifically when we're talking about biases that can harm someone, specifically in like the healthcare field or areas like that, where life and death can be in the balance.
And thank you, Amber, for sharing that. And you are spot on, about advocating. And many people may not even realize that they can ask to speak to a hospital administrator. So thank you for sharing that. It kind of reminds me of even when we think about situations right now with the justice system, in terms of all lives mattering, you should be able to actually, if you don't feel comfortable in a situation, if I'm not mistaken, you can ask for an additional officer to come or a superior if you don't feel comfortable. But many people probably don't even realize that they have that right. Now, whether or not the police will actually get their superior, that's another issue. But it's one of those things, to your point, about knowing your rights and knowing what you can and cannot, like what you can and can't do.
Yeah, because everybody has a boss. No one is out here doing these different jobs without a boss. We have a boss. We all have a boss, or at least an accountability group. So true. You have to really push for yourself and make sure in those situations that you are getting help. And I'll let you keep going to the second point you're making. Sorry, I diverted this a little bit.
Oh, no, this is great. And I do want to highlight some of the comments. Sweetly Spoken said implicit bias literally kills.
It does.
And she also said Serena and Beyonce even had to fight the doctors. Crazy. Shanae says, or Makita, that's why I was so shook on the way to deliver my son. That's why I made sure I had a doula and my family in the room. So I do want to.
And that's another thing. Sorry about that.
You can go ahead.
The other thing is, if you don't feel comfortable, thank you for bringing that up. Have someone else with you, especially in the healthcare area. You can bring people with you to be your advocate. If you know that someone else understands this better, most of us know at least one nurse in our life.
Right.
And then also, when you start to learn the language, they know that you're not ignorant to it, and they begin to pay attention more when you're using the right language that fits in, and they're like, oh, shoot, this person knows what they're talking about. Often that also turns them back on. The other thing I do want to say about the healthcare field, because it's a very interesting industry right now. A lot of the folks are under a lot of pressure, especially with COVID. A lot of stuff is they're just doing it and trying to get things done, and they're not necessarily doing it on purpose. They're just trying to get through that day. And when you have a lot of people who are under-resourced and don't have access to to the amount of staff they need. So I know my mom, she used to work at the Naval Hospital, and there's plenty of nights when they were understaffed. She had way too many patients, where she would have to report it to them and say, hey, I have too many patients and someone's going to get hurt. And sometimes her superior said, just deal with it. So we also need to be fair that there are times where that's happening, but that doesn't mean it's okay.
Right.
And that person who's in that situation now needs to elevate that up to their superior and do what they need to do as far as their reporting is concerned, to make sure the lack of resources in the institution isn't continuing to harm those at the end of the patient chain.
And you are definitely spot on with regard to that. And I'm checking to see if anyone had any additional comments on that topic, but it also led to a segue with regard to maternal care. So if all lives matter, then everyone would receive the same level of maternal care, which we are finding that that's not always the case. And more recently, the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health reported that in the United States, Black women are 2 to 6 times more likely to die from complications of pregnancy than white women, depending on where they live. Total mortality, rates range from 1.9 deaths per 100,000 in New Hampshire to 22.8 in the District of Columbia. which is really pretty close to us. We're right here in the DMV area. But when you look at the mortality rates, even for Hispanic women, it's 10.3. For non-Hispanic white women, it's 6.0 per 100,000. And the leading causes of maternal death are hemorrhage. So Amber mentioned that earlier, hemorrhaging, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and embolism. And so a personal story, similar to like earlier, Amber shared a personal story where she actually was impacted by implicit bias in healthcare. I recently had a miscarriage in the beginning of the year. So I found out I was pregnant in January. And in February, I had a miscarriage and I had surgery the next week. And after the surgery, I had complications. So I had the list of notes from the doctor, and they told me, oh, well, just wait and see if it gets worse. If you start hemorrhaging, come in. And I'm like, well, what does that look like? Because I'm having symptoms that I'm calling you about, and I have a fever. I literally had a fever for almost 2 weeks, and thank God for Amber's mom. I know Makita was reaching out to me, and I had different people who are in the nursing field. My sister-in-law, Shayna, like all of these individuals trying to help me and educate me so that I could talk to my doctors. 13 miscarriage / abortion pills later, I did not finish my miscarriage that I started on February 17th. No, yes, February 10th, actually. It was the 17th that I went into surgery. I did not finish the miscarriage until March 27th. And I had to essentially.
And that was after surgery. And
after surgery.
Over and over again, what was happening with you and how your body is not responding in a way that typical. You were the atypical case, and often they don't look at the atypical.
Right.
Really cookie cutter. Here's what everyone works this way, so here everyone gets the same thing. That's not how that should work.
And it definitely did not work that way. And to your point earlier, I think it's the pain tolerance that maybe people think that we have. I literally was afraid that I could die, and I knew that infection was a possibility. So I kept calling them, and actually Amber had stopped by to see me. And before they left, Amber and Meron were here, and Jennifer are my good friends, and my fever had spiked again. And this was about 2 weeks, a week and a half or 2 weeks after I had the surgery, that I was still having issues. And thankfully, my job was very understanding, but I literally could not be here today because of a mistake. And the doctor never told my husband that she left tissue. So essentially, she did not take the full fetus out, and she didn't tell us. They sent me away from the hospital in DC, and Sibley is a pretty good hospital. They sent me away knowing this and did not tell me. So that's another example of, if all lives really matter, would that situation have happened? Or would they have taken it a little more seriously and not handled it as just another routine case, even seeing the issues that I was having?
Right.
With regard to that, do you have anything that you would like to add regarding, any advice for individuals?
I think what you said was very important in that even though, Mary, what you went through, you didn't know how to handle it. You did reach out to other folks to ask for help. I think a lot of times we get insular. We don't ask for help. Someone has a solution somewhere, even if it's a few degrees of separation away from you. And if something doesn't feel right, we always need to see or ask or whatever. A lot of times we'll have a bad feeling about something and ignore it, and then something even worse happens. If something is going wrong and you feel like someone is being biased against you or they're not caring your situation, they didn't care. Like, you were calling, they're like, oh, you'll be okay. In fact, they did not tell you about what was happening. My mom, again, was in healthcare, and she worked specifically with moms who were having issues, and she would see doctors ignore women who were in pain, crying, because they believed that they were faking, and they would come out of the room and say, oh, they're faking, don't worry about it. And literally at times, some of those women were close to living their lives, and lost their lives because a doctor decided that they were not a priority. So because of that, you have to trust your gut and know, because a lot of times someone else is not going to be there for you to be able to help you even in that situation which you went through. You had to ask others to make sure, hey, is it okay for me to have this temperature for 2 weeks going straight? Am I in danger of hemorrhage and things like that? But be loud, simple as much as possible, especially in the healthcare arena. Say things, repeat to them things you looked into, say no, you're not here. Make sure they know you're important. I'm sorry that you have to actually prove your importance to people, but sometimes it's good to talk to about what you do for a living, how you're contributing to society, and it's horrible and that you have to do this, but they can finally connect you to human versus case and versus patient 1,000 whatever out of their money.
That is so. That's a really good point. In terms of making sure that they know you're important.
I feel it's deeper than the high pain tolerance, but 300% is in depth with other biases. But that's what data has shown that they do believe that.
Oh wow. And it's amazing because I think if we take a step back in terms of just lives mattering, period, because there's only one race, the human race. And I think oftentimes people forget that.
Technically, through DNA, that's accurate. Your DNA doesn't say
That's so
black.
true.
So it doesn't say you're white, it doesn't say you're Spanish, it doesn't say you're Asian, Pacific Islander. Your DNA does not know what race you are. It knows
so
what
true.
Groups you were close to, and that you all possibly lived in different areas. And even for those who have taken 23andMe, it doesn't tell you you're black. It's saying you're probably from this region of people, because DNA does not show race. Race is something we all created. It's not a thing. We've all created this thing.
That is so true. And another thing with regard to that, to your point, I think people forget that, and they just, and I think because race was created to divide, it was literally to keep people at a certain level. So that has gone on now for many years, but there's literally one race, the human race, and we forget and we separate ourselves. And there's actually different studies on like biases and stereotypes, to the point that Amber was making earlier about implicit bias and all of us having some degree of implicit bias. But when we think of even stereotypes, I do want to give an example of the conformational behavior model. So this is actually a psychological model that has been studied in terms of diversity, where they show if someone has a strongly held stereotype. So we talked about implicit bias earlier. If you have a strongly held stereotype, there are times where you will make what you believe to be true. So we think about healthcare, we think about our justice system, we think about going to work every day. Those things we can actually make manifest. So an example is, if I do not tip, if I go into a restaurant and I say, for instance, I'm young and the waiter thinks young people don't tip, the waiter gives me poor service. In turn, I don't tip. They assume I didn't tip because I was young, not because they gave me poor service. And so literally it's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle that goes round and round. If you make yourself believe that certain individuals are less than, or certain individuals are violent, or there's certain narratives that are painted, which we all hear the term now, fake news. Sometimes the news is real, sometimes it's not, but you really don't know which way to go in some instances, because sometimes what is being shown is to paint a narrative. And if people believe that narrative, then the conformational behavior model rears its ugly head, and they believe it's happening because what they believe, not because of what they do. Any thoughts on that, Amber?
Yeah, that's real. I mean, even if we all be honest about it, if we believe something, like I'm trying to break this down so y'all understand like where this is coming from. If we believe something with our whole heart, but for like stark evidence, most of us continue to believe the things we believe. Like if I look at online, I see people sharing different ideologies, and they really believe it. Even if I came to them and said, "This is what proof says," they're like, "Oh, that's not true. I've had this thing in my head for so long, it must be true." And the other problem is with those beliefs, we do live in a situation where the news and media do show images of certain things over and over again that helps to instill beliefs. Let's talk specifically about Black men and crime. Let's have that black men in the media. If that same day a white man did the same crime, but he didn't elevate to the media's attention. So that's a problem because the media has played a role in taking stereotypes that have been in newspapers way back in the day, where there was comic strips or putting black people on different ads for different material they were selling. All this stuff has been happening for so long, and they continue to thread the narrative. One example, I was watching one of the incidents where, and they were talking about the looting that's happening right now. I'm not sure if it was in Minneapolis or where it was. Probably was Minneapolis. But the woman, the newscaster, was about to talk about the looter, and she was saying, this person is looting. A white woman comes out. She begins to backtrack her narrative. She begins to say, oh, she may work there. She may be working there to get the clothes and to save the clothes. Like, she began to backtrack. But the whole other time she was talking about looters when she saw them looking like what she thought looters looked like. When someone looked like a non-looter, she's like, there's no way that this person can be here looting. They must be a employee who grabbed all these bags of clothes and came to save the clothes. I'm like, ma'am, really? So, and all lives matter. If a looter is white, black, Asian, whatever it is, they are a looter. You know,
right.
Special print. The news does that. They do that all the time. Someone said they saw that. They do it all the time. We did it with Katrina. People were looters versus, I forgot what they were saying for the other people in that situation. It was like black people were looters and the non-blacks were something else. So media does have responsibility.
So true.
And the beauty about social media is that now some of that responsibility has been put back into the hands of the people, and we can follow some windows open that the regular media wasn't even showing, right? You saw that man with a hammer starting that nonsense who was not a black male. So, but the normal media didn't catch that. People on the ground had to catch that. So a lot of times we have to realize that if all lives matter, the news would report across all crimes evenly and not continue to perpetuate stereotypes and make people scared to walk outside the door. Because right now, it looks like we shouldn't walk outside the door. If you look at the news, it looks like the world's falling apart. If you walk outside, you're going to catch COVID and you may get shot by police and you're going to die. Like, that's what it looks like on the news. But if we actually are realistic and walk outside, most of us outside, our neighbors are okay. People are doing what they need to do. Everyone's still loving each other, and love is real. But the news, because they need your ratings and they need to sell ads, are going to make this sensationalized and hyped up. This stuff is very important. But we need to make sure they're reporting it from an avenue of if all lives matter. All the news should report evenly across all groups, whether it's a cop doing bad or a cop doing good. They're not showing the cops doing good. Everybody else is posting that. They're not showing that cops are marching with people. You're having to pick that up on someone's social media feed. So they need to be fair. That some of this stuff is sensationalized to make us get even more angry at each other. When literally I've seen sheriffs marching. I've seen chief of police saying they're marching. I've seen men, cops talking to each other, telling them they understand, they care. I've seen cops stealing. All these things happening, but then they want to promote the beating. And there are cops out there beating. So show it evenly. If all lives matter, we don't show the message we want to show. We show the message across the board. Sorry, that was a little longer than I expected. I got a little passionate.
And no, I love the passion, and I think we need to hear that. And that the tip that you gave everyone in terms of the news, it's really finding out the facts for yourself. It's kind of like one thing I used to hear a long time ago: read the Bible for yourself, because if you don't, you hear someone else's interpretation. That's kind of the same example when it comes to your news. Be aware and not necessarily take it all as truth or non-truth, but really be able to dissect it and find out for yourselves. Because even for me the other night, I honestly thought the post that Trump had tweeted, I thought it was not real, and maybe it was a bot or it was fake. And so the looters, right, that he was referring to, like he was saying that the looters were thugs and that they were essentially going to start shooting. But then I went back to a post from the 1st of May where he called the looters very good people. Well, not the looters, but he talked about, in Michigan, yes. It was the protest, yes, for the for COVID-19, and he said these were very good people. And I said, well, I'm confused. A looter is a looter. To Amber's point, in the news, reported the same way. And so that I know for me personally has been very frustrating. So I have been trying to protect my mental sanity and my peace. And that was kind of why I was like, you know what? If all lives really matter, we would all do things differently. And even the example when we think about, take for instance the Holocaust. The Holocaust, we have museums in remembrance of that really horrific situation, but people will tell African Americans to get over slavery that was X amount of years ago. But no one tells a Holocaust victim to get over what happened to the Jews because that was so many years ago. So to me, I think what has really stood out is how do we take a step back and say, if I were in that situation, how would I look at it? And I think it's a different level of empathy and sympathy, realizing I don't want to discredit this person's experience, but I do want to also recognize that they may feel a certain type of way because I don't know how I would feel in the same situation.
Agreed. And I want to talk to two things you just said. So one thing around the news thing, the quick breaking news often gets things wrong, but normally the paper gets it closer to right. So it's important. I know we stopped reading the paper, but I get my Daily Baltimore Sun via email or whatever, and I read the paper because they have to take it. They take it more seriously what they're writing and make sure they have all the facts and they do reporting much different than they report when it's like breaking news. They're just reporting whatever's coming to them. So making sure we understand that. The other thing is to hold your media accountable. If you see some mess, contact them. They have a whole number that you can contact and say, hey, that was wrong. A lot of times they'll pull stuff down and retract. That's why some stuff they're like, oh, we were wrong, and they have to say that. Also, don't only watch one news channel. I think one of the biggest problems that all of us, we all pick our news.
So
and
true.
That means you're getting one perspective and you're not getting all sides of it. You're getting one perspective and then you're getting mad at the other side because they don't believe your perspective. The problem we have in this country right now is that we're also, not all, but the way the news and the way the narrative is written, you're either this or that. There's nothing else, and that is it. And you shouldn't have any other opinion in the middle. When in reality, that's not how most people think. People don't think in extremes all the time. Some people do, but most of us do not. So it's important to often turn to something you would never listen to and listen to it and see what they're saying. And you may learn something, or you may learn that, oh, they're tripping, and I don't want to hear that right now, but I think it's important for us to get outside of our own bubbles, get outside of our own friendship bubbles, and talk to other folks and learn from other groups. And then, what was the last thing you said? I had something else. I lost it, but go ahead.
Was it with regard to like walking a mile in someone's shoes? But not, I didn't say it specifically that way, but put yourself in that person's situation. It'll give you more empathy and sympathy for other people and what they're going through. And the other thing I said is not discrediting how other people feel, because we can't, like, I will never be a police officer, so I can only imagine how terrifying it must be to see the things that they see every day. So they see some of probably the most horrific crime scenes. So I can imagine, right? So I can imagine it would be hard to see the best, because it's like when I handle claims for insurance, I saw the worst of the worst. And after a while, quite a few people would not tell the truth. They would lie. And so then you start to wonder who's telling the truth and who's not. But then I can't lump every claimant or every insured in the same bucket because of a few. And so if all lives matter, we wouldn't lump everyone together. Like, we don't say white on white crime, Mexican on Mexican crime, Asian on Asian crime. You never hear that, but you hear black on black crime. Or you don't hear people saying things like, with regard to the police, they say the police fear for their lives. Well, I have been in a situation with my grandmother. I was 9 years old, and we were pulled over by the police after a tornado that I was involved in. We were just trying to go home. My grandmother went to get food to feed the family, and the police stopped us. She showed them her ID. They wouldn't let us in the neighborhood. And she said, well, I'm confused because I've seen you let all these other people pass that I know don't live there. And I was 9, but I knew who my neighbors were because we had before one way in and one way out. And we knew everyone because there was only 4 streets in the neighborhood. So the police wouldn't let us through. And so my grandmother and the police officers got into an argument. she could have very well have been a George Floyd or a Breonna Taylor or a Sandra Bland. They didn't like the fact that she spoke back, but they also did not consider what they said to her. So I literally watched them grab my grandmother's arm and try to pull her out of the car. They got one cuff on. They couldn't get the other one on because she did not let that happen. Yes, my grandmother was like, no, get your hands off of me. And I remember her doing this. And then it was 3 officers and her. And then it was my great grandmother in the back seat and I was in the passenger seat. And before I knew it, they were yelling at each other. And I just remember the officer yelling about your mom is this, because my grandmother was like, well, your mama. And then they were like, your mom. And then I was like, shut up, because you're not going to talk about my family. And I was 9. And I just remember it was ridiculous. I'm thinking, we just want to go home. I lived through this tornado. I was at home when it happened. We don't have lights. We don't have food. We just want to go home and take this food so the rest of the family can eat. And they stopped us. Meanwhile, the other people who were coming over didn't look like me. And I knew they didn't belong in the neighborhood, from like, meaning not that they didn't belong, but that they didn't live there. Because the police told us we didn't belong. So I'm like, how is it that we don't belong and her license shows we live there, but they do belong, just so they can survey the damage and maybe take pictures? It's not fair. So that was my first instance with regard to the police. And then there were quite a few after that. And of course, it wasn't due to anything that we had done wrong. It was just speculation regarding a group of people. And so seeing those things do paint your lens a little bit different. And I did want to mention that your experiences do impact how you see things. So do keep that in mind. But if you keep an open mind, I didn't discount and discredit every police officer because of those few who wouldn't let us go home. I ended up with friends who were police officers, and I still have compassion for them and know that they want to get home to their families. But I wish those officers would have compassion for the people that they stop and realize they have families too.
I think another problem with that is the way policing has changed, and that is not community policing for the most part. When you are a police officer and you're active in your community, I remember like when I used to live on base, my parents were in the military, there were certain cops you knew of because they were around the area or what have you. And even like thinking back to cops at school, I had cops in my school you may not have, but I did in school. You knew the cops' name. So the cops knew the behaviors of humans, knew people, and knew who they were. So they were able to, if something happened, like, we're cool. Why are you doing this? What's going on? But now we're in a situation where people are policing communities they're not a part of and that they don't belong to, and they haven't taken steps to get to know that community. So, like you said, they already live in a very high, intense environment. And my brother was a MP or military police for some time. He's a correctional officer now in a jail. So I do understand that you're always on heightened alert.
Right.
I'm only getting called because crap is about to go down and something really bad is happening. But it's also the responsibility of whatever that policing body is to make sure those people are in their community and participating. And it's also our responsibility to make sure that people aren't just policing our community and not being a part of it. They should be coming to the rec center. They should be meeting the kids. They should be coming to the school and talking to the kids. They should be becoming a part of that community if they're policing it and if our taxpayer dollars are paying for that. And that's just the reality of it, because if all lives matter, cops are part of the community and people accept the cops in that community. It's not a thing where I'm running from the cops. I think we all done that at least once. I'm running from the cops or something's happening because I'm scared because I saw something happen on TV or because someone told me this, or I'm calling the cops on someone because I don't want to have a conversation with my neighbor that could have ended in 5 seconds. Now I've elevated and called the cops. If a cop is in the community, they'll be able to know that, oh, Jane doesn't like Jesse, and this is bullcrap. Y'all figure this out. You shouldn't have called me in the first place, versus it elevates to the point of someone getting hurt. So I think it's important for police to be an active part of the community and not just coming in parachuting, policing and arresting people and then leaving out of it.
And I don't know if you've seen the gentleman, I don't know his first name, but I think his page on Instagram is T. Norman. He does a great job at community policing. He goes, he takes the kids' toys, he sits with them on their front steps. he goes and interacts with the community. And you're right, Amber, that's a great point. I do remember that growing up to a degree. There were some officers that we knew, actually quite a few. And then I used to work in a drugstore, so I got to know them. Yeah, really good point. Any advice with regard to even just our justice system and how we as citizens can proactively impact the communities in which we live and hopefully help people see that all lives matter?
So, the justice system is a very complicated beast. I went to law school. I have not taken the bar yet. I do plan to take it. But I remember being in my criminal law class and reading. So all you're doing is reading cases, and you're learning about all these different things that happen in life and whatever. And you're reading these horrible situations, especially in criminal law, you're reading these horrible situations, and you're having to like really dissect these facts and read about how people were killed and how people were someone murdered their wife, or the woman who the Asian back in the day around the Rodney King time, we had to read about the case where the Asian lady shot the black girl in the head. She thought she was stealing, and it was the way the gun was rigged. It was like they believed it was an accident. You should actually read all that stuff and see what the whole case is. So when I came into law school, I read all these different cases, and the reality is, depending on who your lawyer is, depending on who your judge is, depending on where you live and where your case is being handled, you could have multiple different outcomes depending on who your jury is. You're literally taking jurors who are not trained in the law and then telling them to apply the law, or you have a judge who may be making a decision without a jury. So there's a lot of things in the system where, depending on right place, right time, there could be an issue. Now, add on top of that bias and different issues that are in the system and embedded. We've seen it where if you look at one judge and look at just don't look at the race, pull out the race, just look at the crime, and then put race back on it. We've seen that Black men in particular get way higher sentences than any other group, and that shouldn't be. If all lives matter, same crime, same time, like that's right. What it is. But we're not at that point yet. And I know for me, I work in for my last position. We were helping states launch a system that allows you to handle your case on the computer without going in front of a judge. Not necessarily the type of crime that we're talking about, more so like misdemeanors or traffic misdemeanors and other stuff like small claims and things like that. But what they saw when they compared it to the person in front of the judge and the person who did it on the computer, if it was a Black person on the computer, they did just the same way as a person, another person. If it was a Black person in person, they didn't figure out as well, and they were able to see them because the computer took away the race. They didn't know the race. They could assume like your name, but they didn't know the race. So there was totally much better outcomes for the Black person on a computer. So it's not. It was the same. They compared all the different. The same type of issue that they were all dealing with. So if all lives matter, I, as a Black person, should be able to go into a courtroom and have the same outcome as I do if I went onto a blind system. And that shows us that there is an issue where people are seeing things and assuming things. There have been judges who said, and I've been in rooms with judges, and they'll say, I have to see a person's face and I can tell by how they move if they're lying or not. And I'm like, there's no science that says how someone moves determines if they lie or not. So you shouldn't be allowed to do that. And about the justice system, and I know we're getting close to our time, the thing about our justice system is, folks don't realize this, but when Trump did all those different appointments, the reason why a lot of people were concerned, a lot of those people are in those positions forever. And they're the god of their court. When I say that, that means there's no one checking on them. Unless you are outrageous, they are allowed to administer laws, and there's no one checking on them. Like, listen to that. They're allowed to administer our justice system with no oversight, for the most part. Yes, if they're doing something crazy and someone pulls it out and brings it up, yeah, then they get in there and that can happen, but that's rare. And there's think about how many municipalities there are. I think I forget how many, I'm like blanking out how many counties there are, but over 3,000 counties, whatever the number is. And each place has their own courthouse. That means their own judge. That means their own way they administer justice. So across the world, everyone's doing it whatever way makes sense for whoever that judge is of their court. If all lives matter, our justice system should operate the same across every single judge. I shouldn't go to judge one to get a better
You are spot on. Well, I can say District 7 is very lucky to have you on the ballot, and the fact that where you are in terms of just your background and where you are in terms of right now being able to try to merge data and information with technology, because you can see that is definitely the wave of the future and where we are, and also where we're going. And so that work is huge. So thank you for taking on that work, and I'm looking for ways to make a difference in your communities. So everyone, you may know Instagram only gives us an hour. I found out. Yes. Oh, go ahead.
So I wanted to say, one of the things I did want to leave with everyone is how I received a message from one of my friends yesterday about how to get involved. I know a lot of us, when these things happen, we feel down and we're like, how can I help? How can I get involved? For Samaria right now, it was, let me do this podcast. Let's have this conversation out loud. And that is very important. So there are things that you can do. But I look at it 5 different ways you can actually get involved in this. And I'm not talking about 5 ways that are like going out there and changing the whole world. That's not what I'm asking anyone to do. I'm asking everyone to focus on what they can do in their own atmosphere. So the first is one, invest in yourself. Investing in yourself means taking care of your mind, body, and your spirit during these times. We cannot do anything if you're not taken care of. Me and Mary talk about this all the time. Fill your own cup up before you fill anyone else's. Do not take your cup and fill up everybody else's cup around you. Period. Don't stop doing it. Because the beauty is, when you fill your own cup and your cup begins to overflow, everyone can come around you and get the overflow. So then you're not empty and you're able to keep giving because you're always filling into yourself. So make sure you invest in yourself. That also means we all have a purpose on this earth. And there are some things that we all have not been doing that we know and we feel we should be doing. There are lawyers watching this. There are entrepreneurs watching this. There are judges watching this. There are tech professionals watching this. There are advocates watching this. There are health professionals watching this who have not activated their gift. So at this time, it's time to figure out, what do I need to do what I'm supposed to do on this work in this world. We're all here for a reason. We all were blessed that we were the one. We made it biologically, which is like when you look at the statistics on how you biologically got here and the chance that you're here, it's like very small compared to everything else. You're here for a reason. So make sure you invest in yourself. The second one is invest in your family. Do not leave and help everyone else out if your family's not taken care of. That means take care of your own household. We all know we have family members who need help, who need to learn things that we have, give them things, not necessarily money or things like that, but I'm saying like building up your family institution. Like my family, we're really good about volunteering with each other. We're really good about, if someone needs something, we all chip in. We all go to each other's events. Someone needs to get to college, buying that person's books. Like as a family unit, we should be taking care of ourselves, because we can't take care of anybody else's house unless our house is taken care of. Third, invest in your second family. That means your work. So you spend more time at work than you often spend with your family. And a lot of times at work, this is where you're dealing with those biases, and this is where you're dealing with those things. So it's important for you, one, to stand up for people who are at work with you, right? If you see stuff going down, whether it doesn't matter what race, people feel about the climate in the organization. Like there's things you can do, and I'll write these things out to Mary and put them on like a post or whatever, because I have more in-depth things I'm trying to run through before our time runs out. Fourth is invest in your community. So we all can invest in our community. We have stopped knowing our neighbors. Like when I first got here, if I see people, I'm like, hey, I'm Amber. How are you? Let me talk to you. We stopped doing that. We have to get to the point where we know our neighbors and know each other. And that also means volunteering in your community, going to the school next door, volunteering, see if they need help, mentoring kids in your neighborhood. If you have kids, taking your kids and getting to know other moms and other fathers and things like that, and building our community back up. Technology and everything else that has happened, moving from suburban to urban and urban to suburban, has broken down those community levels. Like you said, Mary, y'all knew everyone who lived in your neighborhood. We don't have that anymore in most communities. Right. So we need to be active in our communities and start building that back up. So if crap goes down and you get hurt or something happens, your community is there with you. Or if you need food, we can make sure someone has has food next door or have the resources they need. And then finally, invest in your government. You are already paying a lot of money into this thing called government via taxes. So if we're going to hand all this money, never have I ever seen a situation where we put money in something and then be like, oh, okay, I forgot what happened to my investment. No, look at it as if though it's your 401k. You're checking in on it, you're making sure it's okay. If stuff's not working, you're saying things about it. So we need to make sure that one, we're at city council meetings. Even if you go to them physically, a lot of times they post the notes on that. Make sure you know what's going on. Especially if there's an issue area you care about, make sure your representative knows your name. Like, they have people who are answering the phone, and when you're calling with the same issues, they're writing that stuff down, and that's how they know what they're going to work on. People go up to lobby and talk to different representatives. There's times where I had to go up to the Hill. I had to go up to the Hill to try to communicate an issue that I was working on with your Congress people, or at least someone in their staff, to get some of these issues heard and see what they're doing about it.
Right.
So putting that pressure on them. And then most importantly, you have to vote. And you also need to run for office if you're able to. Whether that's in your city council or what have you. We can't expect people to care about the issues we care about if we're not putting people in place who care about the issues we care about.
Right.
Like, period. And it's not, and if all lives matter, we're going to invest in ourselves. And it doesn't matter what race you are. You're going to invest in yourself. You're going to invest in your family. You're going to invest in your second family, which is your work environment. You're going to invest in your community. You're going to invest in your government. Because unless we have all these things working together, these little spurts of, oh, let me help here, but then I'm like, oh, I'm back to my own life again. Forget everyone else. That isn't how it works. We are all humans and we're interconnected. The way we were built was linking to each other. We have to link again to each other.
Amen.
And if all lives matter, we're all going to work on ourselves, our families, our communities, our work, and our government to make sure that we're not having these conversations 10 years from now.
Amen. Well, Amber, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here tonight. And thank you for your 5 points. And we're definitely looking forward to the share with the information. Everyone, this will not be the last time that Amber will be on the CC America podcast. I am so grateful for you, Amber. And I thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight. So, yes, we will definitely be doing this again. So thank you.
Thank you for creating this platform and having this conversation.
You're welcome. And everyone, we will be following up regarding a community forum coming to you soon. So thank you all so much for joining tonight. You all please be safe, be blessed, and stay healthy. And we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.